Cool. So I am just going to do the brief UV unwrapping introduction video. And I'm also going to show you some models that have textures applied to them that have been unwrapped previously, just so that you can get a sort of clear idea of what it is that we're aiming for, and what sort of good UV layouts look like. So, as I said in class, this is our mesh. For this tutorial type thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to explain the basics on a cube. A cube is a very easy shape, and Maya does a very good job of unwrapping it because it is just all square and it all makes sense. When you actually come to unwrapping something, it will be a little bit more difficult than a cube, but you know, a good place to start. So there are two ways that you can get your UV menu up. One option is to come up here and press UV editor, and that gives you, these will either be stuck together or they're separate. It depends on what version of Maya you're using. But this is basically your 2D view space. And then we've also got our UV toolkit. I very rarely use the UV toolkit, so you can probably close that if you want to. And then you can see that we've got white lines and green lines. So this is just telling us where our seams or our cuts or our splits and our joins are. I don't particularly like this setup. I like to come up to here, workspace, and then come into UV editing this way. So yours might be the other way around. You may find that your perspective viewport is on this side. If it's not and you would prefer it to be, you can grab these tabs, move them around, and dock them where you want. I don't know why they shifted a lot of stuff in the later versions of Maya. I like mine on this side because this is the side I usually use. So yeah. Also, you may end up with the outliner here. We're not going to worry too much about the outliner, so we can dock that just by clicking it. And we can also dock the UV toolkit if you want, so it's all on the side. So you just end up with a little bigger space to work with by here. So yeah, as you can see, there are a couple of things that we've got going on here. So there are a bunch of options up here for you. There's a bunch of options. These are exactly the same ones as you would get in modeling standard. This doesn't change. Like I said, your UV toolkit is here. I very rarely use these because everything that you can find up here, everything you can find up here, and everything you can find over here is located somewhere in this pinwheel menu. So you can either hold, that's just by holding down the right mouse button, shift and right, oh my god, right mouse button gives you more options, and it depends on what viewport you hover over, you're given extra options as well. We will be using this little button here. Basically all this does is it takes a snapshot of whatever you have in your 1.1 UV space, which is by here, and you can save it out as a PNG. That is mainly for doing textures inside Photoshop and other bits and bobs like that. Is there anything else in here I need to touch on before we get into the meat of it? Oh, if you do apply a texture to this and you find that it's not showing, there's this button here. Always make sure that's on so that it shows what your texture is. And there's also this button here, but we'll cover that when we actually put textures on our models, because right now there is no texture. Cool. So holding down the right mouse button, you will get this option: UV shell, edge, UV face, vertex, and a bunch of other things. You'll get that in most options in either window. So object mode is basically the object. You click off it, click back on object. edge works exactly the same as when we're modeling. Vertex face. We've got a few other options here. We've got vertex face. I'm not going to worry about those. We've got multi, which is just you can click anything. So instead of being locked to only being able to select vertices, you can select anything just by hovering over. You can do that in the modeling as well. It just can get a little confusing. And then we've got UV and UV shell. Okay, come over here. You've got UV shell. So basically, if you come to UV shell, you can see when we hover over this, it highlights this is a UV shell. Okay, that is basically the UV shell is the 2D flattened out version of the 3D object. So, first things we're going to do, we're going to go to object mode, ignore this, we're going to come up to the UV at the top here, and we're going to come down to automatic. Now when we do this, Maya is going to try its best to figure out the best sort of way to cut up this object and lay it flat. And like I said, because it is a square, it's going to do a really good job of doing it. When you have anything that isn't a square, it's going to do a horrible job, and I'll show you that in a sec. But for now, we're going to go automatic. Basically, what that has done is taken every single one of these faces, and it's turned them into shells. So you see how every white line, or every edge now, is a white line. White lines equal seams, or joins. If we come to edge, and I will explain this in a sec, so don't worry. So just sewed this edge up, and you can see that it's now gone blue. Sometimes it'll be green if we click on it this way, but if it's not white, it just means that it's joined. Okay, if you've got a white line, it means that it is separate. So what I'm going to do very quickly, put that back to where it is. So if you come to UV shell, you can see now we can hover over each of these and they correspond to a face on the model. So if, for example, I take, what's a good edge to sew? If I take this edge and I sew it up. So what you see has happened here is that we've got these two edges here, or these two faces, but they are sewed, they're joined down the middle. You see, we tell that because there's a blue line here, not a white line, and so that means that our UV shell includes the two faces. If I were to then say, okay, let's get this edge, and we'll sew those together, and we'll take this edge and sew this together. What we will end up with is the one, two, three, four edges all laid out. The issue is that when we sew them together, they join relative to wherever they are in the UV space. There is a button that you can, so if I just undo this very quickly, there is a button that we can do, which I forget exists, I'll be honest. Move and sew edges. So that's basically what that did, was take this UV shell and manually bring it over here and sew it all together. So yeah, but why would you do it manually when you could just press this button and it does it for you? The issue that we have with this now is that obviously these edges are completely straight when you look at them, and these ones are at a little bit of a skew if angle. So in order to sort that out, what we can do is, what can we do? We can shift right click, hold it down, and we can come to straighten UVs. And yeah, basically what that does, I actually don't like the way it's done that. Oh no, it's done it okay. Hang on a second. This is why I don't use this option. I just feel Yeah, no, we're not going to do it that way because it hasn't kept it however well. I'm just going to do it the way I usually do it. Not going to move and sew things. So instead of moving and sewing, we're going to select our edges. Going to shift right click and we're just going to sew it. And then we're going to right click, come to UV shell, and we'll press Control U to unwrap. And basically what that's done is when we sew something, so I'm going to do that again just to show you very quickly. Take our edge, select an edge. You can see there's selected two edges. It's got this one and this one. The reason for that is that this face and this face are literally next to each other. There they are, these two. And they're sharing a line here. So when we split it, it's like we're putting two pieces together. But these are they're separated because there's two separate pieces. What we want to do is turn that white line into a blue line. We want to join them, and then they'll share the same edge. So edge, we're going to sew. And what that has done is that's sewn it directly in the middle relative to where the one face was and the other face was and the board over here. That's fine, but this doesn't actually look anything like the shapes what we have over here. So to combat that, we just select the UV shell and we press Control U. Control U for unwrap. Very easy to remember. So we have this lovely UV shell here. And if you want, what you can do is line them up. So I'm a stickler for this. I like to fit them. You have to fit them in the 1x1 space. There are times that you can come out of your 1x1 space. I'm not going to talk about those today. I literally just stay in 1x1. When I say what I mean by 1x1, you see there's a 1 here and there's a 1 here. So we're working in positive space. So we're above and we're positive. If you see down this way, the numbers are really small, but they have minus next to them. So this is negative space and this is negative space. We're going to work in 1, 1. Okay? But you have to keep them in this 1x1 thing. So make sure everything fits in here. But this seems a little bit skewiff. I kind of want to straighten it out. So we're going to shift right click, come down to straighten UVs again. And you can just see that that's a little bit neater. It's a little bit nicer. So the aim is to basically take this and make it flat. You want to fill as much of this 1x1 space as you possibly can. If you don't fill all of the space, it's basically wasted texture space. That's called texel density. So this is when it can get a little bit confusing. So I'm going to turn this checkerboard pattern on and I will show you a very dramatic comparison. So when we turn these on, our main goal is to make sure that this checkerboard pattern remains square. What can happen sometimes is, if I just take these and scale them in, you can see that we've got some really weird skewing here. This happens when your UVs aren't laid out correctly. So not only do we want to make sure that they are lovely and square, but we want to make sure that the size is comparable across the entire model. So if we look at this one, these squares are absolutely huge in comparison to these ones. Basically what that means is, if I bring this down and put it over the actual writing on this grid, put it over the 2 zeros, so you can see how absolutely massive that that writing is on here. It's absolutely huge. Whereas if I take this one and bring it up here, you can see it's actually not that big in comparison. If I turn it around so we can actually see what we're doing. So you can see, like when I scale this up, the bigger the UV shell, the smaller the squares. So you're basically fitting more of the squares onto the actual shell itself. Um, this is going to have a higher resolution than this stuff. Okay, so basically what you need to make sure is that your model is consistent all over, basically. There are times that you deviate from that, but again, for this, we're not going to worry too much about splitting it and whatever. We're just going to make it comparable all over. So it doesn't need to be bang on to, the percentage or to the decimal, but it just, you can eyeball it. Like that was pretty good. And just grab one side of it and make sure it kind of lines up. And then, no, don't grab it here, grab it here. And you can just see, yeah, it lines up there, lines up here. You don't need to line it up on the actual model, just as long as the grid is the same size. And then do the same for the bottom one. And just scale them up. And once they are comparable with each other, you can then just take them all and scale them right up and fill the entire space. This is when sort of knowing the layout and how we want your model to look is going to actually help. Because obviously you could say, oh, well, I want to keep all these faces together, but they physically can't go any bigger than that. That is as big as they can go, because if you scale them any more than that, they're going to come outside of our 1x1 UV space, and we don't want that, basically. We want to keep it here. Because this is limited to being this size, these guys can't go any bigger. And that's fine, but look at all the wasted UV space that we have. All of this. So it sort of makes sense to cut and paste and put things where they should be, but fill this space out. With this cube, you're always going to end up with some empty UV space. You just can't fill the 1x1 space up 100%, unless you stack things on top of each other, and we're not going to do that. So yeah, basically all we're doing is we took our mesh, we are holding down shift right click. Well, we're selecting edges first, holding down shift right click, and we're cutting. We're clicking certain ones, shift right click. So, okay, that's the basics of going in and doing it. What I'm going to do now is come to object mode. I'm going to come to UV again, and we're going to look at a few of the other things. So that was automatic. That's the way that me and I believe Jack does it this way as well, where you automatic do it, sew everything together, and then start adding your own cuts. It's just a good sort of way of getting everything laid out, and you can go in yourself and actually understand how the UVs are put together. Best plane. So, for example, if we base, I very rarely use this, and by very rarely mean I never use this. I've been shown by Gareth. So if we press that, okay, it picks an angle which Maya thinks is best and does a projection and puts it in the UV space. As you can see, that doesn't look anything like what we have over here. We turn the checkable pattern on. This one's fine, this one's fine. That is, I've never seen it do that before. That's actually quite impressive. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. It will work on certain models, probably not for a cube. We have object mode, UV, camera based. So this is a fun one, depending on where you put the camera. So if I turn the grid off a sec, if we look at this, you can see how the model is put there. If we do a camera based, it basically mimics it over here. You still have to unwrap this, but yeah, it's that's basically what it does. Is it takes your camera-based ones. Pretty good if you want to do top-down ones or straight from the front, or a couple of different reasons. But for this module, we're not going to worry too much about that. It's just good to know what each of them do. Contour stretch. I've never used that. I'm not going to worry about that. Normal based, don't worry about that. Cylindrical is for cylindrical items, funnily enough. It doesn't do a great job. I tend to sort of unwrap them myself using automatic. Planar is great for just flat surfaces. That's pretty useful. And the spherical one, I wouldn't bother using the spherical for spheres. In fact, I'm going to show you something very quickly. If we come to modeling, so I'm going to turn this back on. I'm going to hide my cube. By default, up here there is a sphere. When you spawn it in, we'll just make it bigger. So this is the default sphere in Maya. As you can see, it's very spherical. But it can cause problems when unwrapping because of all of these at the top. So these are three-sided shapes. So 1, 2, 3 makes a triangle. These are referred to as tris. When we unwrap spheres, they're difficult anyway. We kind of want to avoid having these tris and all merging in on this one point at the top. It can just get messy and it can get really, really confusing. So a cool way to get around that we found, I was shown the other day. We make a cube and you just smooth it a bunch of times. So smooth and then add divisions to it. 3 seems to be the minimum to get a nice sphere, but you can add more if you want, but just be aware of topology. It doesn't actually change the shape all that much from 3 to 4. So when we click off it, you can see we've got a sphere, The plus side of having it like a smoothed cube is that when we come into UV editing, that's how Maya wants you to unwrap a sphere. And you can see at the top, you're going to have all of these seams and it's going to be awful. That's how it wants you to unwrap a cube. There are times when this sphere is better, I would argue, for characters when you're doing their eyeballs. This is a really, really useful way of doing it. But for other stuff, this one's pretty good. The only downside to unwrapping it like a cube is if you wanted to texture it like a globe, or if it had a very specific texture that needed to be in a certain place on it, that might be quite difficult to figure out. So you might want to unwrap it a little different to that. You would probably do something along the lines of I would split it down the middle so that you end up with 2. The thing to remember with spheres, you're always going to end up with some kind of skewing, like these squares, the checkerboard. They're still square, it's fine, but you can see that they are bending slightly. On spheres, you're always going to get it because it's kind of really difficult to unwrap like a round object in Maya. So yeah. But yeah, that was that. So I can get rid of that, get rid of that. So yeah, as for like a little introduction into UV editing, that's kind of all I wanted to show you in regards to the tools and how you actually go about doing it. The cut and sew is the most important bit, I think. It's my cube. Get rid of that. What I do want to show you very quickly is some UVs that are already laid out. So here's a little character that I made. UV editing. Cool. So what I have done is I've taken his hands, his eyes, his face and his hair, and I've put them all on one UV sheet here. As you can see as well, there's only one hand showing up on the UV. That's because I have basically mirrored him. So whatever happens on this side happens on that side. And I've stacked them on top of each other. Because it's hand painted, I can stack them on top of each other, so that's fine. And then if I come to object, so they're all on one sheet. If I then click this, highlight that, not his face. There's a few other bits. We've got that, his shoes, I believe. And there's wasted space here, and I don't remember why. I think he had another coat on or something. There was something else filling this space, but I think I removed it before. I think he had wings. I think he actually had wings on, and that was filling this space. But I've removed them for this version of it. But yeah, you can sort of see how I've outlined them. What's this thing? Yeah, no, that's fine. But yeah, so if I highlight over these a second, we've got trouser leg, but then, so if I click, it'll click one of them. You see there's two, so to select the two of them, I just have to click drag over them. Selects the two. These are his shoes. That's the bottom of his shoes. This is mirrored, so I only have to paint half of it, and mirrors the entire thing. Same for his jacket. So this is the back, which you don't actually see because it's under his coat. But then this is the front, and it's basically mirrored on top of each other. We've got buttons down here. This isn't actually finished. I haven't finished painting the jacket or the trousers. But yeah, so that's kind of what completed UVs will look like. Grab all the bits a sec. Yeah, cool. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to show you. There's nothing else in here that's useful, I don't think. No. Oops. No. Okay. Yeah. So I will do another recording where we actually unwrap something together, but that was just kind of a little intro, just to sort of get you up to date with terminology I'll be using when we do unwrap something. I hope that was useful.